Bonjour Madame la Ministre, bonjour aux membres des médias, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. So for today we will ask you to ask one question and one follow-up, and please introduce yourself and the media that you're representing. Thank you.
Bonjour Boris Proulx, Le Devoir. Madame Joly, le gouvernement de l'Ukraine a lancé un sociofinancement aujourd'hui pour inviter les citoyens à fournir de l'aide à l'Ukraine. De l'aide financière et peut-être une partie de la diplomatie échappe au contrôle du gouvernement. Est-ce que vous voyez ça d'un bon œil?
Je pense que c'est une initiative citoyenne qui appartient, dans le fond, à ceux qui l'ont intenté. Puis, en même temps, de notre côté, on en fait beaucoup pour soutenir l'Ukraine, que ce soit 500 millions en matière d'aide militaire de plus de ce qui avait été déjà annoncé, que ce soit au niveau de l'aide humanitaire, environ 150 millions, et surtout 1 milliard de dollars via le Fonds monétaire international, le FMI, pour faire en sorte de soutenir la stabilité économique de l'Ukraine. Je peux comprendre que dans les situations présentes, il y a une nécessité d'aller trouver des nouvelles solutions parce que la situation est extrêmement préoccupante. Et donc, dans les circonstances, je réitérais notre appui à l'Ukraine, mais aussi notre empathie par rapport à la situation.
Est-ce que vous conseilleriez aux citoyens privés de donner de l'argent comme ça ou il y a des risques de détournement, par exemple, de ces fonds-là?
C'est toujours un choix qui relève de tout un chacun. Mais en même temps, je pense que les Québécois et les Canadiens peuvent être confiants que le gouvernement du Canada, qui les représente, fait sa part dans le conflit actuel.
Thank you.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. Minister Joly, Ukraine's Prime Minister has told CBC News that it's time for Canadian politicians to visit Ukraine. In the past, the government has said that there are security concerns. What security concerns do you have that Boris Johnson or your U.S. counterpart Antony Blinken don't have?
Well, obviously, we believe in the fact that we need to support Ukraine. We're doing so. And there is definitely a case to show our solidarity with Ukrainian friends. And that is why not only have we gone to Ukraine, I've gone personally to Ukraine, but it is important in the future to go to Ukraine.
The Ukrainian president, Ukrainian Prime Minister also said that it's time to open up the embassy. When will you release a plan to do so in Ukraine?
So, as I mentioned, our goal is to open the embassy and bring back diplomatic presence in the coming days, and so we're following suit.
Thank you, Ashley.
Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. My first question is for Minister Joly. Former President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, has come out and said that he'd like to see Canada support an initiative that a Republican is trying to get going in the United States to have military intervention in Ukraine if Russia uses chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. What's Canada's stance on that red line? Would Canada intervene militarily or with NATO?
Well, of course, we will always work with our close allies, particularly through the G7 and with like-minded countries. We've worked with Sweden since the beginning of the conflict, and Sweden was part of Operation Unifier, as you may know, and obviously we want to continue to not only send heavy artillery to Ukraine, but also train Ukrainian soldiers. At the same time, I think we have to be ready for all scenarios. Secretary Blinken and I are in close contact. We had a long conversation again last week. I'm heading to the G7 next week in Germany, and we'll continue to have these conversations.
I want to ask Minister Linde more about the risk analysis, let's say, that Sweden's undergoing in terms of joining NATO. Obviously, Russia used the expansion of NATO as rationale for aggression and an invasion into Ukraine. Does that at all give Swedes pause when they consider joining the military alliance? And I'd like to hear from you, Minister Joly, if Canada is supporting Sweden's potential entry into the alliance in any way.
Well, thank you. Right now we have a deliberation with all the 8 parliamentary parties under my leadership and with the Minister of Defense. And this is one of the questions that we are analyzing. How are we going to keep Sweden and the Swedish population safe in the best way? We know that the NATO membership will give security guarantees At the same time, we know there is a great risk of Russian interference in different ways. If we decide to make an application to NATO until the ratification process is clear, and that can take several months. And if we decide to ask for membership, we will need security assurances and support from NATO allies, and that's one of the reasons why I have been to Washington, D.C. yesterday to talk with my American colleague, and today in Ottawa to talk with my Canadian colleague.
Of course, we think that if Sweden wants to join NATO, Canada would support. We think that because we are like-minded countries, because we're Arctic nations, that we share common values and we have a long history of cooperation, that obviously Canada would be standing shoulder to shoulder with Sweden. And we think also we can do this in a short term, because we think that the process needs to move quickly.
Brian Platt with Bloomberg News. Just on that same topic to both of you, when you talk about risk between an application and ratification from Russia, what kind of risk do you see there? What kind of interference? Is it cyber? Is it military? And what do you need to see from your, well, I guess I'm talking to you, Minister Linde, what do you need to see from your, from NATO countries when you ask for a security guarantee?
Well, we know we cannot get security guarantees because you can only get that if you're a full NATO member, but we need some kind of security assurances if we are going to apply for membership. And what we see from Russia is, of course, there can be cyber attacks. We already know that there is they try to influence us. There are campaigns in Moscow that Sweden are Nazis right now, taking famous Swedish people and pointing out that they are Nazis, totally ungrounded, of course. They are trespassing our borders with air fighters and so on and so forth. And of course, they see the choice of Sweden to Finland to join our own security way. And if that is a NATO membership, they will do anything they can to discourage us. And therefore, we need visibility from NATO partners. We need different kind of visibility when it comes to supporting Sweden and Finland if we should make that kind of decision. I might prompt, this might be what you were going to say anyway, but Minister Joly, have you made any promises on behalf of Canada? Has there been any discussion on that front between you two on this visit?
So obviously I'm happy that my colleague from Sweden, Linde, is here in Canada. And also I was in Finland 3 weeks ago along with our colleague, our Finnish counterpart, Pekka Visto. And I spoke to Minister Visto also earlier this week. The question of the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO obviously needs to be answered by Finns and Swedes themselves, but should that decision be made, Canada is a steadfast supporter of the open door policy of NATO, and not only that, because of the reasons I highlighted before, the like-mindedness, the fact that we think that Sweden and Finland's contribution to NATO is certainly a plus. We think that we can be one of the first to support them.
Thank you.
Anya Kudadeglia, National Post. Question for Minister Joly. You've said that you would support Sweden's bid for NATO if that's what the country chooses to do. What does that support look like? Is it a matter of voting in favor, or does it extend further than that?
Well, obviously, it is an entire process of accession, and so it is important that different countries within NATO position themselves. And we hope that not only can we support, should that be necessary, Sweden and Finland, but also that other countries will follow suit. And Canada being that country that bridges certainly the US and Europe, but also other countries within NATO, we will do that diplomatic work.
And some of my colleagues asked about risk analysis in terms of a reaction from Russia. In terms of Canada, are you concerned at all about Russia's reactions should Canada be a loud supporter of Sweden and Finland's bid for NATO?
I think that we coordinate with other countries, but we know that Russia has launched strong disinformation campaigns throughout the world, linked to Ukraine and certainly linked to other countries within NATO. And my colleague Linde just gave examples, which actually when we had lunch together earlier today, she highlighted in great detail. We need to make sure that we counter that disinformation. This is why your work as journalists is important. This is why also we need to make sure that platforms, digital platforms, do their work. We know that May 9th is coming. May 9th is an important day for Vladimir Putin. It also happens to be Europe Day, the same day. And so we know that in the context of May 9th, there will be a lot of disinformation, and therefore we want to make sure that we send a strong message on the importance of democracy, on the importance also of security, and our steadfast support to Ukraine, NATO allies, and their partners.
Thank you.
Mari Wolf from the Canadian Press. You spoke a bit about sexual violence towards women and girls and how they should be investigated as war crimes. Could you tell us what support Canada and Sweden is giving to this investigation, and whether the RCMP team are equipped or whether you will beef up that specialism so that they can look into these crimes?
Well, thank you. We have put a lot of emphasis on the accountability. Sweden has universal jurisdiction, and we have already started to send people, or not we, but the prosecution authorities, to Ukraine. And one thing also to interview refugees that is coming, that is mainly women and girls and children, about their witnessing, so that they could be prosecuted later. Also to give experts on investigating sexual and gender-based crimes for the International Criminal Court. We have just given equivalent of $1 million roughly to ICC for their works, because the question of accountability is one of the key questions in a situation like this.
I think Canada's response, would say, is based on three things: addressing the issue, second, supporting survivors, and third is really helping with the investigation. On addressing the issue, as you may have read, Secretary Truss and I, so Foreign Secretary Truss from the UK and I, wrote an op-ed regarding the importance of shedding light on the fact that sexual violence is being used as a question of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and we take the allegations of genocide extremely seriously because we think there's strong evidence about the fact that there is genocide happening in Ukraine. At the same time, the prosecution needs to have support. Definitely the 10 RCMPs are there, but we're looking at other tools to make sure that the ICC is well-tooled, and I'll have more to say in the coming days about that.
On a completely different subject, I mean, the EU has, in the last week or so, announced that it wants to wean itself off Russian oil, possibly with the exception of Hungary. And I wondered if you felt Canada, although we are geographically rather far away, could do anything in that respect to support EU countries which are trying to end their addiction to Russian oil?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've already banned Russian oil, but obviously we know that Canada doesn't have the same level of dependence on Russian oil than certain European countries. So definitely these are the conversations we're having, particularly with the Germans and European allies. We want to make sure that we address the issue of energy security with them. We've increased our oil production. This was announced by my colleague Jonathan Wilkinson last month, and I'm heading to the G7 next week and to NATO afterwards, and Germany, and clearly this will be part of the different discussions we'll have. And
I think this will be all. Thank you so much for attending, ministers.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for coming to the best country in the world, along with Sweden, obviously.
Thank you very much for being such a good host. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.